I still remember the night she threw my suitcase out the front door like I was nothing more than a piece of old furniture. "You don't belong here anymore," she hissed, her hands on her hips, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. That was my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms, the one I had defended when neighbors whispered about her arrogance. And there I was, standing on the porch of the house I helped my son pay for, the house where I thought I'd spend my final years surrounded by family. Instead, being pushed into the cold night like a stray dog. My son. He stood behind her, his head down, his silence louder than any word. He didn't say, "Stop." He didn't say, "Dad, come inside." He just looked away while I clutched the suitcase full of my old shirts and worn shoes. My heart ached in a way I never knew it could. I had buried my wife young, raised my son with everything I had, worked my hands raw to make sure he had more than I ever did. And now, this was how it ended? She smirked as if she had won a war. "Find somewhere else to go. You're just in the way." But what she didn't know was that the old man she kicked out into the night was not going to fade quietly. No, I had someone from my past. Someone she prayed she'd never see again. And when I walked back into that house with them by my side, her face drained of color, her lips trembled, and for the first time, she knew she had lost. Before all of this happened, before the betrayal that shattered me, my life was built on one thing: sacrifice. I wasn't born into comfort. I grew up in a house where winters meant sleeping with 2 pairs of socks because the heater barely worked, and summers meant patching the same old fan with tape so it wouldn't rattle itself apart. I knew what it meant to go without, and I swore to myself that when I had a family they would never feel the same emptiness I did as a child. I married young, too young perhaps, but I was deeply in love. My wife was my light, and together we dreamed of a simple life. Not riches, not mansions, just a safe home filled with laughter. We had one child, my son, and the day I first held him in my arms, everything shifted inside me. Suddenly, every choice I made, every drop of sweat that rolled off my forehead at work, every ache in my back from lifting too much weight, it all had a purpose. It was for him. I worked long shifts in construction, then odd jobs on weekends, mowing lawns, fixing fences, even shoveling snow for neighbors just to earn a few extra dollars. There were nights I came home so exhausted that my hands shook when I held a fork. But when my little boy ran up to me shouting "Dad" and wrapped his tiny arms around my neck, the fatigue melted away. Money was always tight. I skipped meals sometimes just so he could have seconds. When he outgrew his shoes faster than I could save, I put cardboard in my own worn-out pair and smiled like it didn't matter. I patched the knees of his jeans until the fabric was more stitches than denim. But I never once let him feel poor, because in his eyes, he had everything. I still remember walking him to school in the mornings, his small hand clutching mine, his backpack almost bigger than him. I couldn't afford fancy supplies, but I would draw little smiley faces on his notebooks so and he opened them. He'd know his dad believed in him. On field trip days, when other kids had $10 bills for the snack bar, I gave him 2 crumpled dollars and a sandwich I packed myself, praying he wouldn't feel less than the others. When his mother got sick, my world collapsed. Cancer stole her quickly, too quickly. I watched the woman I loved fade before my eyes, and suddenly I was both father and mother. I promised her on her hospital bed that I would raise our son right, that I would give him the life we dreamed of together. And when she passed, I buried my grief under layers of hard work and determination. There were lonely nights, of course, nights where the house felt too quiet, where I sat in the dark staring at our wedding picture, missing the warmth of her laughter. But even in those moments, my son's soft breathing from the next room reminded me I still had a reason to keep going. I was there for every milestone: his first broken bone when he fell from a tree, his first heartbreak when a girl in high school ignored him at the dance, his first job interview where I ironed his shirt 3 times to make sure not a wrinkle showed. I clapped the loudest at his graduation, even though I had to sit in the back because I couldn't afford the fancy family tickets. Tears streamed down my face as I watched him cross the stage, because in that moment I felt I had done something right. I gave him everything I could, and when I had nothing left to give, I gave more anyway. I dipped into my savings, money I had quietly tucked away for my retirement, the little dream of maybe one day resting by a lake, fishing, living peacefully, and handed it over so he could put a down payment on his first house. I told him it was a gift, that I didn't need it. In truth, it was all I had, but his future mattered more than my comfort. I told myself the loneliness didn't matter, that the cracked walls of my own small apartment before I moved in with him weren't important. What mattered was that my son had a roof over his head, food on his table, and a chance to build the life I had once dreamed of with his mother. And when he married, I swallowed the lump in my throat and embraced Camille as best as I could. I told myself, this is family now. Be kind. Be patient. I helped fix their leaking pipes. I mowed the lawn. I cooked dinner when they worked late. I thought if I gave more, if I loved more, they would see my heart. But deep inside, there was always that shadow of loneliness. A chair at the table that felt too empty without my wife. Nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if my son knew just how much I had given up for him. Still, I silenced those thoughts, because fathers don't keep score. Fathers give, and give, and give, until there's nothing left to give. I never imagined that after all those years of sacrifice, after every sleepless night and every dollar stretched thinner than it should have been, the very people I loved most would look at me and see nothing but a burden. But that's exactly what happened. It didn't happen all at once. It began like a slow leak I didn't notice until the floor was already warped beneath my feet. At first, it was the look she gave me when I sat in her spot on the couch, that tight smile that said, "You don't belong here." "Dad, can you move?" she'd say, pretending to be sweet. "It's just a seat," I'd reply softly. "It's my living room," she'd shoot back, eyes glued to her phone. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was overthinking it. But then she started labeling the fridge. "Meal prep? Do not touch," the sticker said, even on the milk. I laughed the first time. She didn't. "It's expensive," she sniffed. "We're on a budget." "I can buy my own," I said, holding my wallet like a promise. "You should," she answered, already walking away. I noticed my photos vanishing from the hallway. The frame with my wife's smile disappeared first. "Where's the picture from our wedding?" I asked my son. He stared at the floor. "Camille's redecorating," he said. "Where is it?" I pressed. "Storage," she answered from the kitchen. "Clutter makes the house feel smaller." That word sank into me like a hook. Clutter. I started eating in my room to avoid the comments. I started taking walks so I wouldn't be in the way. One night I came back and my key didn't work. "New locks," she said calmly when I knocked. "You changed the locks without telling me." "It's safer," she replied. "Besides, you don't need full access. It's our home." "Our home, the one I helped pay for," I reminded her gently. She rolled her eyes. "You gave a gift. Gifts don't have strings." That one stung. I let it go, or tried to. The next week she, accidentally, forgot to set a plate for me at dinner. "Oh," she said, glancing at the table. "I didn't realize you'd be eating with us." "I live here," I whispered. "Do you?" she replied, and the way she said it made me small. She started correcting the way I spoke to my son. "Don't baby him," she'd say. "He's a husband now." "He's my boy," I'd answer, because he always would be. "Stop calling a man boy," she snapped. "It's embarrassing." The thermostat wars began. "It's freezing," I said, rubbing my hands. "Electricity isn't free," she shot back. "Go put on a sweater." I wore 2 sweaters. I wore silence like a third. Then came the first real humiliation. She had neighbors over. I came out to say hello. "Don't worry about him," she said loudly. "He just hangs around." They laughed politely. I stood there, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. I tried to make conversation, but she cut me off. "We're talking about investments," she said, eyes flicking to my old boots. "Not really your lane." That night I cried quietly in the bathroom so they wouldn't hear me. I thought of my wife. I asked her for patience. I prayed I wasn't losing my mind. Next came the pamphlets. "Just options," she said, laying brochures on my bed. "Independent living communities." "I don't need a home," I said, voice cracking. "I have one." "Everyone your age needs support," she replied, touching my arm like we were friends. I pulled away. "Please, don't do this." She sighed. "Then meet me halfway," she said. "Contribute to the bills." "I will," I agreed. "Just tell me what you need." She named a number higher than my monthly check. "You know I can't afford that," I whispered. "Then we have a problem," she answered, and walked out. My son came in later, eyes heavy. "Dad, let's not make a scene," he murmured. "I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm asking to exist." He rubbed his temples. "She feels pressured," he said. "I washed your socks by hand when our machine broke," I replied. "I skipped meals so you wouldn't," I said. He looked away. "Camille thinks—" "I don't care what Camille thinks," I snapped, then softened. "I care what you think." He didn't answer. Days later I found my chair in the garage. "Less clutter," she said again. Clutter. Always clutter. Then came the final dinner. She set the table for 4 and left one plate in the sink. I reached for it. "No," she said. "We're having a private meal." "I'm family," I said, forcing the words through my teeth. She leaned in, eyes cold. "Family doesn't freeload." I felt the air leave my lungs. "I gave you the down payment," I said. She smirked. "And I'm grateful," she replied, voice dripping with sugar. "But gratitude has an expiration date." My son stood behind her, silent, a shadow with my eyes. "Say something," I begged him. "Dad, please," he whispered. "You're making this hard." "I'm making this hard?" I asked, stunned. "Maybe it's better if you spend some time elsewhere," he said. "Elsewhere?" I repeated, as if the word would change if I said it back to him. "Just for a while," he added. "A while where?" I asked. Silence. That night I took a walk to keep from drowning on dry land. When I came back, my belongings were in black trash bags on the porch. My shirts, folded by the same hands that once buttoned his first school uniform, stuffed together like rags. My tools, the ones that fixed their leaky sink, tossed on top like junk. I froze. "What is this?" I asked. Camille stood in the doorway, one hip cocked. "You're moving out," she said. "My room is inside," I replied. "Was inside," she corrected. I turned to my son. "Is this what you want?" I asked. He swallowed. "Dad, it's for the best," he said, barely louder than the night wind. "For the best," I repeated, numb. "For the best to throw your father outside." His eyes watered. "Don't make this harder," he whispered. I picked up the handle of the suitcase that had been mine since before he was born. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Someone across the street called their dog inside. Humiliation wrapped around me like a wet coat. Shock came first, cold and paralyzing. Then sadness, heavy and thick in my chest. Disbelief followed, sharp and dizzying, like the ground had tilted. And finally, under all of it, a slow heat began to rise. Not rage, not yet, but the beginning of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. I straightened my back, the same way I did after every long shift when my body wanted to fold. "All right," I said quietly. I lifted the bags. I walked down the steps. I didn't look back. But inside me a door closed, and another one, the one they didn't know about, began to open. The days after they threw me out blurred together like gray rain streaking down a dirty window. My new apartment was a box. One small bed, a single chair, and walls so thin I could hear the couple next door argue about bills every night. I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling paint, wondering how everything I'd built had crumbled so fast. I kept replaying the sound of my son's voice in my head. "Dad, it's for the best." For the best. Those words cut deeper than any knife. For the best to abandon me? For the best to strip me of my dignity? For the best to treat me like I was nothing more than clutter, as Camille loved to say? At first I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I told myself I could be strong, that I'd endured worse. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw my wife's face. I heard her last words to me. Take care of him. Had I failed her? Had I raised a son who could turn his back on his father so easily? The guilt gnawed at me until I couldn't sleep. I began walking late at night, just to clear my head. The city lights blurred, the pavement felt endless, but the ache inside me never lessened. And then, one evening, fate handed me the final straw. I was in the grocery store, reaching for day-old bread because it was all I could afford. That's when I heard her voice, Camille's voice. I froze. She was standing 2 aisles over, laughing with a friend on the phone. And what I heard next turned my blood to ice. I finally got rid of him. Dead weight. Honestly, it's like having a dog you never wanted. You feed it, it lingers, it smells. Eventually, you just throw it out. Dead weight. A dog. That's what I was to her. Not a man. Not a father. Not the one who handed over his savings so she and my son could live in that house. No. To her, I was nothing but a stray mutt scratching at the door. I gripped the shelf so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to march over, to shout, to make her eat those words right there. But instead I stayed still, because suddenly anger wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed justice. I needed revenge. I walked home in silence, my heart hammering. Every step felt heavier, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. I thought of every insult, every time she moved my chair, every time she called me clutter, every time my son stayed silent when he should have defended me. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something else stirred. Determination, resolve, the kind of steel a man only finds when he's been pushed so far into the dirt that the only way out is up. That night, I sat in my chair, my one piece of furniture, and looked at the ceiling. I whispered into the quiet, "You think I'm weak?" My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "You think I'm done? You think I'm nothing but dead weight?" I leaned forward, my hands trembling, not from age, but from rage finally finding its place. "Well, you're wrong." I could almost see my wife in the shadows of that room, her eyes watching me. And for the first time in years, I felt her approval, as if she too wanted me to stand tall. I thought of Camille's smug smile, of my son's bowed head, of the neighbors whispering. The shame that had weighed on me shifted into fuel. If they wanted me gone, I would return in a way they could never forget. If they thought I was finished, I would show them I had only just begun. I clenched my fists. I breathed deep, and I made a vow, not to God, not to anyone else, but to myself. Enough is enough. They will regret underestimating me. They will choke on their own cruelty. And when I come back, I won't come back alone. That night, the old man they had thrown away died, and the man who would make them pay was born. I kept my fury small at first, wrapped it in patience like a bandage, because revenge rushed is regret. I started by doing the only thing I could think to do. I gathered everything I had ever kept. There were envelopes in shoeboxes, yellowed receipts folded inside old shirts, canceled checks I had never thrown away. I spread them across my kitchen table under the single bulb and watched them look back at me like witnesses. Every check ached. The one for the down payment, the on, as that covered drywall and a new roof, the tiny sums I'd sneaked to him when his pockets were empty. I photocopied bank statements at the library, my hands trembling as the machine whirred, not because of the mechanics, but because the copies felt like armor. Then I did the slow work of verification, dates, signatures, a trail that could not be called memory or sentiment. If they wanted to call me a beggar or a burden, I would hand them proof that I was a builder, of a life, of a home, of his future. But paper alone wouldn't cut it. People protect each other. People hide behind loyalty. So I started making quiet phone calls, not dramatic ones, small, polite inquiries. I visited Mrs. Alvarez from next door. She had a good eye and a sharper memory. She told me about the day Camille moved in with 2 expensive suitcases and a look that never softened. I wrote down her words. Her signature on a short statement became another nail in the foundation I was laying. I found the man who delivered the furnace years ago. He remembered the day I paid extra because the installation had problems. He remembered because I had tipped him with cash when I had none to spare. Those little confirmations stitched a net beneath the story they had tried to remake. Then I reached out to someone I'd only met once at a church fundraiser years ago, a quiet man named Marcus, who'd had a falling out with Camille long before I'd known her. At first, Marcus did not answer. He had every right to distrust a world that had turned its back on him. I left a note under his apartment door. I know the truth. If you want it back, meet me at the diner. Tomorrow, 9. He came. He looked older than his years, and a part of me ached because the same system that made me sacrifice had also hardened him. We talked in whispers over cheap coffee. I showed him the letters I'd kept, scrawled words that, when read together, didn't leave room for accident. He studied them like a man examining old scars, then nodded. Dead slowly. "She did this to me," he said. "She made me small to make herself shine." Marcus became the keystone of my plan, not because I wanted to hurt my family further, but because truth needs a voice. We started small, him cleaning up his appearance, getting a steady job at the shop 2 blocks from my apartment, learning to walk in this world without being braced by bitterness. He called one mutual acquaintance and asked for a notarized copy of the complaint that had put him away, the document Camille had lied about. The clerk at the courthouse was surprised at first, but when Marcus showed his ID and his resolve, they helped him find the records. Paper again, proof that matched my copies. Secrecy was our currency. We met in parking lots and behind the library, speaking in code, passing envelopes like contraband. I taught myself to be invisible in plain sight, feigning loneliness at church, attending community meetings with the appearance of a man merely trying to belong. Camille saw only what she wanted. That helped. If I'd barged in with accusations, she'd have painted me as bitter and old. I would have been dismissed. So we planned to use the stage she loved. Her own dinner parties, her neighbors, the little web of respect she'd woven, and unravel it with facts. Public truth cuts deeper than private pleading. I fixed my clothes. I went to a barber and asked for a simple cut, nothing flashy. I bought a shirt that fit without clinging to pity. Confidence is a costume you can buy cheap. Dignity is what you earn, and I rehearsed both. I stood in front of my mirror and practiced walking into a room not as a beggar, but as a man who had been wronged and who would not beg for redress. He would insist upon it. Every phrase I planned to say was rehearsed until it sounded like truth. Short, clean sentences. No bluster, no begging, enough to make people listen. We also gathered allies in places I had forgotten existed. Pastor Tom, who had officiated my wedding, agreed to come if it became necessary. He knew the family's history. Mrs. Alvarez agreed to sit near the front at any gathering. She had a way of making the room look like it remembered what was right. I knew that neighbors' murmurs could turn into the kind of public pressure that even a smug wife might not withstand. People hate a liar when the lie is laid bare in front of them. I prepared contingencies. If my son denied my role in their home, I would produce the originals, the bank passbook, the deed with my name on transaction dates, the canceled checks. If Camille tried to claim everything was a misunderstanding, Marcus would have the paperwork proving he'd been framed. If Camille called him a liar, the courthouse would show a record that could not be swatted away with charm. We kept our trump cards folded, shared only at the last moment. A plan is only as good as the surprise it preserves. I also learned how small cruelties can be turned to advantage. Camille loved her gatherings. She loved the applause of neighbors. So we selected the night she hosted the block meeting, when most eyes would be on her and her curated perfection. The date was chosen like a chess move. We timed it to a weekend when the street would be full of people who knew the family story, who had seen me work, and had once waved as I walked with my son to school. Those faces would matter. Reputation is fragile when clustered like glass. There were long, slow hours between the pieces of the plan, where nothing happened but waiting. I sat with my thoughts and sharpened them like a blade. I walked the route from my apartment to the house, memorizing each porch light, the squeak in the third step, the mailbox with the bent flag. I visualized entrances and exits, where neighbors might stand, and where the glare of living room lamps would make paper legible. I timed entrances, how to step into a room so that a voice could carry, so that a conversation would pivot toward confession rather than argument. I also practiced restraint. There were nights when the anger wanted to run and strike quick. I would call Marcus then, and he would say two words that always cooled me. Wait. Watch. Patience is a strange ally. It makes you watch foolishness reveal itself. Camille was sloppy in her cruelty. She believed momentum was on her side. She'd started to throw hints, to brag to friends. Little tapestries of arrogance make the best snags. We watched for those threads to fray. One of the craftier moves was to make sure my son couldn't gaslight the room. I didn't want anyone to leave thinking he had been coerced into this truth. So I prepared a ledger, simple entries, dates, short notes, that mapped the help I had given, what I paid, when I paid it, and why. It read like a ledger of love. That ledger would not ask for sympathy. It would state facts. We left blanks in the plan on purpose, spaces where we could press when the time came. This gave us flexibility. If Camille tried to pivot to pity, the pastor would stand and speak. If she tried to accuse Marcus, the courthouse would speak. If she tried to charm the neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez would shake her head. Every possible defense had its counter. There were moments I felt like a fraud, sitting across from Marcus in that diner, telling him how we'd expose her. My hands shook. I pressed them flat on the table until the tremor subsided. We will not stoop to cruelty, I promised, mostly to myself. We will reveal truth. And truth can be counted on. It's stubborn. It does not change when someone wishes it away. The final move was simple and cruelly elegant. I would show up the night she wanted to shine, but I would not storm in. I would enter slowly, with a guest she had thought lost to the world. I would place the evidence before her peers and let her watch every face in the room shift. That was the reveal. That was the moment when pretense collapses under light. I told no one about the precise phrasing I would use. That was mine alone. I rehearsed once, twice, but the words would be the ones the room demanded in the moment. Clear, truthful, nothing wasted. On the morning before the night, I sat alone and folded the papers into a neat stack. The envelope felt heavier than it should. I pressed my thumb against the paper until I felt the indentation of the ink. I wasn't just returning to a house. I was returning to reclaim a history they had tried to erase. When I closed the door of my small apartment that evening, I felt strange, not light, not vindictive, but resolved. The plan was not about spectacle. It was about making the world remember what I had done and what they had thrown away. If they wanted to see a man reduced to tears on a porch, I would not give them that satisfaction. I would give them a reckoning. Tomorrow, I would walk back in. Tomorrow, the stage would be set. Tomorrow, Camille would see, not accusations, but the truth, and she would have to look at it. I folded my jacket and kissed the envelope as if it were a rosary, then slipped it into my inner pocket. Patience had been my teacher, the plan my pupil. And when the moment came, I promised myself I would keep my voice steady, my steps measured, and my eyes on the one thing I had lost, my son's respect. The night I returned to my son's house, the air was cold, sharp, and unforgiving, much like the thoughts racing in my mind. Every step toward that door felt like the closing of a circle I had been forced into. And tonight, I was the one holding the pen to finish the story. I didn't go back alone. I brought with me the one person my daughter-in-law swore she'd never face again, a shadow from her past she thought was buried, but fate and my persistence had dug it up. I stood tall, my hand steady as I rang the bell, hearing the familiar chime echo inside the house that once was mine. The door opened, and there she stood, smugness plastered on her face, until her eyes slid past me and landed on the figure behind. In an instant her skin lost all its color, her breath hitched, and she stumbled back. "No, not you," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass, but there was no escape. I stepped inside slowly, deliberately, savoring the look of dread twisting her features. My son appeared from the living room, irritation clear in his tone. "Dad, why are you here? Didn't we make it clear?" But his sentence died the moment he saw who stood beside me. His jaw slackened, his eyes widened, confusion swirling with guilt. I didn't have to say a word yet. Their reactions were the music of my revenge. I walked past them like a man reclaiming stolen ground, my eyes scanning the walls where family photos once included me, now replaced with smiling faces that erased my existence. "This house was built on my sweat," I said calmly, my voice shaking not from fear, but from restrained fury. "And you thought you could erase me as easily as tearing a photo." I gestured to the person beside me, her estranged brother, the one she had betrayed years ago for money, the one she swore never to let near her perfect new life. I had found him after weeks of digging, after quiet conversations with old neighbors and late-night phone calls. He had been discarded like me, left to rot with her lies, and now, standing tall, he looked at her with the same rage I carried. "Hello, sister," he said, his voice low, edged with venom. She staggered, her hand gripping the wall. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her mask cracking, but I only smiled. Neither did I, apparently, yet here we are. The evening unraveled like a storm. I had gathered documents, bank statements showing the money she siphoned from my son's accounts, proof of manipulations, lies she fed him to isolate me. I laid them out on the table, one by one, like a dealer in a cruel game. My son's face went pale, his hands trembling as he read line after line. "Is this true?" he demanded, turning to her. She stuttered, tried to twist the story, but every excuse only dug her deeper. Her brother added his own truth, stories of how she destroyed their family for greed, how betrayal was the only loyalty she knew. Neighbors I had quietly alerted began to gather outside, whispers swelling into a crowd. I opened the door, letting them in to hear the truth. If she wanted me gone in silence, then I would return in thunder. Her lies unraveled in front of everyone, her composure breaking with each passing second. She screamed at me, at her brother, at the world, but the more she raged, the clearer her guilt became. My son sat in silence, his eyes glassy, the realization hitting him that he had chosen a viper over his own father. And then came the final twist. I revealed the will. The house wasn't his nor hers. It was still legally under my name, a detail she had overlooked in her arrogance. I slid the papers across the table, my voice cold as steel. "You wanted me out of my own home? No. Tonight, it's you who leaves." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Her eyes darted, desperate, but there was no escape, no corner to slither into. I watched as she packed her things, fury dripping from her every movement, her pale face a mask of hatred she couldn't hide. The neighbors watched. My son watched, and I stood tall, not as the broken old man they tried to discard, but as the father who had reclaimed his dignity. Her brother followed her out, his eyes never leaving hers, ensuring she knew she could never outrun the truth again. As the door closed behind her, the weight lifted from my chest. My son turned to me, tears streaking his face. "Dad, But I raised my hand. "Save it. You chose her over blood. Tonight you see what that cost." His silence was my final victory. I didn't need his apology. I had my justice. I had my revenge. And as I stood in the home I built, surrounded by the whispers of neighbors who now saw me for what I truly was, I felt the fire in my chest cool. She thought she could bury me, erase me, discard me. But in the end, I returned with the one face she feared most, and made her pale with the truth she could no longer run from. The silence, after the storm of my revenge, felt heavier than any noise I had ever endured in that house, and as I sat alone in my small chair by the window, I realized for the first time in years my chest was not tight with grief or humiliation, but with a strange calm that felt almost foreign to me, like sunlight after endless rain. I had reclaimed my dignity, and though it came with scars, it was mine to hold. I remembered the look on my daughter-in-law's face, the way her color drained as she realized she could no longer control the narrative, that her cruelty had met a wall she could not climb. And that wall was me. The memory replayed over and over, not with gloating laughter but with a steady, quiet vindication that justice had finally answered. My son, torn between his wife's manipulations and his own shame, could not meet my eyes, and though that cut deep, I felt no rage toward him anymore, just sorrow that he had chosen silence when I needed his voice most. In the days that followed, neighbors spoke in whispers. Friends I had thought long gone reached out to ask if I was all right, and for the first time, I didn't brush them off with, "I'm fine," because I wasn't fine. But I was finally free to admit it. I began walking each morning, not to escape the walls that had witnessed my humiliation, but to breathe air that belonged to me. And with every step, I reminded myself that I had survived abandonment, betrayal, and ridicule. And yet here I was, still standing. I thought back to the many nights I ate alone at a table where laughter once belonged, how I had turned my pain into silence so as not to burden anyone. And I realized that in my silence, I had taught them I could be overlooked, but not anymore. My revenge had not been a shout of anger, but a mirror held up to their faces, forcing them to see the ugliness of their choices. In that reflection, they were stripped of the power they had wielded so carelessly over me. Still, victory felt complicated. It was not joy that filled me, but a heavy blend of relief and melancholy, because what I truly wanted all along was not revenge, but respect, love, and recognition that I had given my life for my family. There were nights I lay awake, asking myself, did it have to come to this? Could they not have learned through kindness instead of consequence? But the answer was always the same. Kindness was what I had already given, and it had been spit upon. The lesson carved itself into my heart like stone. When people mistake your goodness for weakness, sometimes the only language they understand is strength. My son's wife avoided me after that day, unable to bear the shadow of her own cruelty reflected in every glance, and though she tried to piece together her reputation, the community never forgot how she had treated me. As for my son, he began calling more often, his voice heavy with regret. And while part of me longed to rush into forgiveness, another part stood firm. Because forgiveness without change is just permission for history to repeat itself. I found peace in small routines, watering the plants in the morning sun, sipping tea while watching the streetlights flicker at dusk, writing letters to myself as though I were my own best friend. And slowly, I became someone I had neglected for decades. Me. Revenge had not given me back the years I lost, but it had given me back my voice, my spine, and my right to be seen not as a burden, but as a man who had endured, sacrificed, and survived. I no longer yearned for a seat at their table. I had built my own, even if it was smaller, and at that table, I sat with my pride intact. If I could speak to anyone who has walked the same road of betrayal and silence, I would tell them this. Your worth is not determined by who accepts you or who discards you. Your worth is carved by the love and strength you hold within, even when no one sees it. I used to think loneliness was the worst fate, but I've learned that living under someone's roof while being unseen and disrespected is far lonelier. Today I choose dignity over acceptance, peace over constant conflict, and self-respect over forced belonging. I don't regret showing my son's wife that she could not break me, because in doing so, I showed myself that I was never broken to begin with, only bent by years of carrying too much weight. And if there is a moral to my story, it is this. Kindness is powerful, but when it is trampled on, you must guard it with strength. For if you do not respect yourself first, no one else will. My life is quieter now, but it is a quiet of my own choosing, not one forced upon me by exclusion or cruelty, and that difference makes all the pain worth it. I still carry scars, yes, but those scars remind me every day that I survived, that I endured, and that I rose again when they thought I would crumble. And whenever I pass a mirror, I no longer see a man discarded by his family. I see a man who stood back up, looked betrayal in the eye, and said, "You will not define me."